a requirement also. So I said no, but I felt bad that I don't think that I was experienced.
Well, we find our can we find our seats, please? Thank you. There will be others, I assume, will be walking on in. But we do have some people online, so I want to get started this afternoon. Well, welcome to Brite's Divinity School's Borderlands Institute Spring Lecture Series entitled Up Walls and Bridges, Instrumentality and Dysfunction at the Border. My name is Francisco Losada, and I am the director of the Borderlands Institute at Brite. It gives me great pleasure today to host this lecture series and to have with us Dr. Jonathan Benjamin-Alvarado, Senior Advisor to the Chancellor and Chief Inclusion Officer at TCU. Before I introduce him, let me thank Rowena Tark, the Institute's Administrative Assistant, who always helps in many ways to put this event together. Also, I want to thank the Luce Foundation for its steadfast support of the Institute and its initiatives, as well as Lauren Baxter and Vanessa Daly for their assistance. Also, adapted from the TCU and Brite House Institute acknowledges the many benefits we have of being in this place. It is a space we share with all living beings, human and non-human. We respectfully acknowledge all Native American peoples who have lived on this land since time immemorial. The Borderlands Institute acknowledges and pays respect to the Wichita and affiliated tribes upon whose historical homeland our school is located. Finally, as we listen to today's presentation, let's be mindful of the 38 migrants who died in a fire on Monday at a migrant detention center in Ciudad Juarez, migrants who have been shut out of the U.S. for years of restricted border policies. Now, for those who were with us last fall through the webinars, those webinars focused on how narratives played a role in informing and misinforming life at the southern border of the U.S. Building on the insightful remarks from the fall speakers, which can be found on Brite's YouTube page, today we are privileged to have with us Dr. Benjamin-Alvarado, who will share with us his academic engagement with the Borderlands. Dr. Benjamin-Alvarado is not only new to Brite, he's also new to TCU. Before arriving at TCU, Dr. Benjamin-Alvarado served as Assistant Vice Chancellor of Student Success at the University of Nebraska, Omaha since 2014, where he also served as Professor of Political Science. He chaired the Senior Vice Chancellor's Inclusion and Equity Leadership Council and led the development of a comprehensive strategic plan. He earned a Bachelor's of Arts in International Relations and a Master of Arts in International Policy and Development from Middlebury Institute in International Studies at Monterey, and a PhD in Political Science from the University of Georgia. His research interests include Cuban energy policy and development, democracy and democratization theory, comparative public policy, Latino and minority politics, leadership, equity, and political science, education, to name a few. Having published many articles, he adds to these essays an edited volume entitled Cuba's Energy Future, published by the Brookings Institution Press in 2010, and Power to the People, published by Routledge in 2000. One final word about Dr. Benjamin-Alvarado that he may not know or shows up on his bio. We have a common colleague with Dr. Iracema Coronado at Arizona State University, who many of our students know through the Borderlands travel seminars. One final, Dr. Coronado co-teaches the class with that he may not know. What also doesn't show up on his bio is Dr. Benjamin-Alvarado is strongly committed to faith-seeking justice. He has shown up to the Borderlands Institute webinars in the fall, and he's an enthusiastic supporter of Brite's values, mission, and vision. Today's presentation is entitled Up Walls and Bridges, Instrumentality and Dysfunction at the Border, focusing on the subversion of sovereignty in service to the racist and proto-fascist efforts to dehumanize immigrants seeking entry into the U.S. Join me in welcoming Dr. Benjamin-Alvarado to Brite Divinity School today.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Francisco, for that wonderful introduction. I'm always kind of astounded at how we continuously are bombarded with the negativity coming from things that occur at the border. So many of them not of the creation of those individuals who are subjected to them. And so what I want to talk about with you folks today is to share a little bit of a research agenda, because one of the things that Francisco didn't also mention was that I'm a policy analyst by training, nuclear policy analyst at that. And so how do I end up talking about things related to migration at the border and diversity, equity, and inclusion for that matter, given what I do here at TCU? Well, I come by it honestly. I'm a child of migrant farmers from California. And I understand very viscerally the plight that my entire family has gone through over the course of 100 years. Some of them coming from Mexico during the Mexican Revolution. And there was a fluidity to them coming back and forth across the border for many, many years until my family settled in California. My mother is one of 8 children. Not one of them was born in the same place. They were all born in different places as they traversed California's migrant farm fields. And it was ironic last night that we were able to host the remarkable Dolores Huerta here at TCU, who kind of just also affirmed so much of what I believe and understand about my own family's plight. But I arrived at the University of Nebraska at Omaha to teach political science, and specifically to teach national security intelligence, because that's kind of my passion. I'm trained as a nuclear non-proliferation policy analyst. And I got to Nebraska, and I was really good friends with the gentleman who was our senator then, Chuck Hagel. And he asked me, I'm happy you're coming to Nebraska. When you can figure out what the university needs, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to try to facilitate, you getting some resources to make that happen. And so, upon arrival there, settled into teaching courses almost immediately. But what I soon discovered was that Omaha, Nebraska, of all places, had become the locus of an incredible influx of immigrants from Mexico and across Central America, to the tune of over 100% in the previous 10 years before I arrived there in 2000. And for the first decade of this century, an additional 100% increase in the size of population in Nebraska. And so there was some cognitive dissonance. The community, the university, the state as a whole was really having a lot of difficulty trying to understand what this influx of immigrants meant to the community. And so, being Latino, being a political scientist, my colleagues at the university said, well, we don't have any courses to teach that relate to this here at the university. What are you going to do about it? I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not why I came here. But what was important about it is I began to learn to understand, and reaching out to other colleagues who were specialists in this and political scientists, what it was that I could do. I first had to understand the dynamic at play. Why were people coming to Omaha, Nebraska, of all places? And it takes me to the border. And my brother was living in El Paso at the time. And I went to visit him, and it was still safe to go over to Juarez at that moment. And so we went over to eat, do a little bit of shopping. And I remember sitting waiting for him to pull the car around, and I see a sign tacked up on a telephone pole that said, Trabajo en Nebraska. And he put a telephone number. So I tore the sign down, and I go back to El Paso with my brother, and I immediately called. And it was a job recruiter for packing houses in Omaha, Nebraska. And I kind of played along with him and started to discover a little bit about what it was that they were looking for. And it coincided at that point, and it started to make sense to me. Wait a second, they're there by design. They're not there by accident. And so let me go ahead and get into the kind of formal part of what I wanted to talk about here. This is a colleague of mine at St. Mary's University. No place is perfect, and no place can guarantee anything. But we can try to create a supportive environment that feels safe. It's true for me when I was working in Omaha, it's true for us here in Fort Worth, but it's especially true for those folks that do work at the border. Tony has been a long part of a legacy from the San Antonio community of offering support to people along the border. And really this kind of stuck out to me when he shared this in a presentation about a year ago that I attended. Let's see here. Talked a little bit about myself already. And what's interesting here as well is, so I went back to Senator Hagel and I asked him, I said, you know what, we've got an issue. We have an issue that we don't understand the depth and the complexity of why immigrants are coming to Nebraska, the socioeconomic impact that they're having on society, the latent and very obvious racism that they're encountering, wage theft, all the things that attend the immigrant experience in this country. And I said, and I'm talking with my colleagues, I think it would be important for us to establish a center at the university that can begin looking at this, you know. And it would be interdisciplinary. We would have historians and economists, sociologists, political scientists, folks working in the social work arena to kind of help animate and to give some kind of heft to the things that we were thinking about. But more importantly, it wasn't just going to be about the Latino experience. We also needed to understand the depth of the immigration experience. What were those forces that were compelling individuals to come from other parts of the world to a place such as Nebraska? So it wasn't just the Latinos working in meatpacking. It was Sudanese refugees. It was Russians. It was Cubans who were all finding this way. And this is brutal work. I don't know if you fully understand what people have to endure. They work on a 33 degrees. They're essentially inside of a freezer. As they're cutting meat, it's a repetitive action, 8 hours a day doing the same thing over and over and over and over with no health insurance, you know. If you miss a day of work, you're fired. So there's a continuous need for refreshing the workforce, as it were. And it really made for us an opportunity to begin looking at the intersection of what contemporary Latino life was like in Omaha, Nebraska, but then also drawing upon a vast number of experts in this country who worked in the area of immigration. And so Senator Hagel, all of a sudden, we've got money. And we established a center with this express purpose of providing knowledge, research, and understanding of where this occurs at that particular intersection. So I began actually much more intentionally having an opportunity to understand and work and of things that were happening at the border, and to take trips internationally to be able to understand why it was that people were leaving where they were leaving from. One of the things that struck me immediately was all of this was very instrumental in terms of why people were coming. I'm just going to lay it out. This country has an addiction to low-wage, low-skill labor that it cannot disentangle itself from. So much of what our economy is based upon has it as a necessary element of it. And until such time as we can address it holistically, you know, to be able to provide living wages for those individuals that do that type of work, you know. Coming from a family of farm workers, I understand it very much so. You know, the one thing that I do credit my family with was, though, that they never really ceded their dignity in the work that they did as they were going through this and really trying to create opportunities for their children. So what we wanted to do in Omaha was to really make sense of it, you know, to provide ourselves there with a much more deep understanding of what was going on there. The first thing we did was an economic impact study. We began to understand that the gain to the economy there was so significant because almost every single dollar that the immigrants were earning was used in three ways. One, to send back to family, but that was always a very, very small portion of what they were earning. The vast majority of it was spent on housing and consumables. And that was the one thing that we continue to understand about their existence there. The other thing is that they were supplying more students to the public schools that had been seeing a decline in population. And it's ironic because the city of Omaha, school district there, did something very unique in 2002. They established dual language immersion institutes across the entire school district that would allow those families, their children, to continue speaking Spanish while they were learning English at the same time. And I think the first class that graduated from high school was in 2012. And these are children that had gone to their entire public school education in 2 languages. Many of them, as a consequence of that, and the nimbleness of what that compels the human brain to do, became stellar college students. Some of them have gone on to become doctors and attorneys and things of that ilk. And I think it's a testimony to what could possibly happen when a community does that with it. The idea of immigrant integration was an important question that we were asking as well. Having large numbers of immigrants coming to the community was important because we began working with Alejandro Cortes at Princeton University. And he's got a very solid sociological idea that kind of animates it. He said, the extent to which immigrants will be integrated effectively into a community is based upon the context of reception. How do you receive, how do you welcome people into your environment? What resources can you provide them as fellow human beings to ensure that they will be prosperous, that they will be secure, that they will have stability in their lives? And so, it's not that we intended when we created the Office of Latino Latin American Studies at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, to be much more intentional about becoming advocates, but that's exactly what occurred. It compelled us to really taking that idea into mind, working with other folks in the Migration Policy Institute in Washington to be much more conscious about the things that we were advocating. So it did mean creating opportunities within education, but to also educate employers about workplace safety, to be in lobbying the state legislature in the state of Nebraska to be much more accommodating, to really go to the Department of Health and Human Services and provide them not so much with a scolding, but as much more kind of education as what they needed to be able to do in order to be effective in the things that they were doing for that community. And obviously, too, for us, it was important for us to help them understand the impact of immigrants and their presence. Because what they were bringing to the community was a richness that necessarily couldn't be measured monetarily, but in terms of the socio and cultural type of impact and contribution to the broader society in the state of Nebraska, it was profound. All of a sudden we see this proliferation of Mexican immigrant-owned businesses, restaurants, stores. The south part of South Omaha, Nebraska has become a vibrant Latino center where it behooves you to be able to speak at a minimum 2 languages. We discovered that we had to have 3 and 4 different languages. We had a number of indigenous populations for whom Spanish was not their first language. And like I said, for me, it was very much a learning opportunity. Part of what we also wanted to do, so it's caused me to also think a lot, going back to that initial experience in El Paso, and then trying to understand the dynamics that were occurring in places like south of San Diego, in the desert of Arizona, where hundreds of people were dying on an annual basis. And it's ironic that it's in spite of the enhanced border security that we've seen along the U.S.-Mexico border, the number of deaths have gone through the roof. We don't even have any idea, to be honest with you, how many people die trying to cross the border on a daily basis. It was a record number this past year of which we could identify. But having worked with folks in Arizona, having knowledge of the statistics that are released by the Border Control, we know that it is significantly higher. And it really does cause us to begin thinking at this from a very humanistic perspective, the extent to which something can be done to alleviate and ameliorate the present situation as it is, to something that is much more accommodating to the needs of those populations. The other thing that I think is important about this I remember when I was on the board of a community service organization in Omaha, Nebraska, that has been working in Latino communities since the Chicano movement in the 1970s. And I remember at one of the meetings in the board was where they were talking about the numbers of people that they were serving on a daily basis. And it was impressive. I had to tell you, it was impressive. But there was a physician who was on the board with me, and he asked the question, why? Why is it that you have to serve that many people on a daily basis? What could be done to prevent or to address this before it becomes that type of a situation? And he shared with me something. This was kind of a play on some biblical scripture. He said, we have become very astute at fishing babies out of the river in baskets. Nobody's asking how they got put in the basket in the first place. And I began to apply that to the immigrant kind of scenarios that we were looking at. What are the causes that compel an individual to leave? You know, I'm sure there's lots of different political, there's escaping violence or escaping economic deprivation. We know and understand all those things. Why is it that we do not do anything to address that particular situation? Why is it that we allow, in our terms of our foreign policy, I'm a political scientist by training, to not address the root causes of why people are leaving their countries? And we've seen this played out again and again. 21 countries this year are experiencing the most immigration to their country that's ever been recorded. 21 nations around the world, primarily developed countries in Europe, here in the United States. You just saw recently what the Canadians are trying to do to kind of quell the wave here. And yet nobody's talking about the root causes in places like Nicaragua and El Salvador and Mexico, Venezuela, Cuba, so on and so forth, and many of the African countries who we're seeing immigrants coming from. And so it's, for me, a very, very interesting kind of intersection of the things that we know that we can do to serve those people at the border. And it's very unfortunate of what happened the other day. I can't think of anything more horrific than what those families experienced in their last moments. And yet this is happening time and time again. And it seems at the service of the instrumentality of our own economy. Our own economy is the cause of why these people are coming. And and we can be critical of immigration policies, but that system has been broken since before amnesty was granted in the mid-1980s. And very little has been done to address any of the realities. It's very similar to gun legislation. Everybody knows it's a problem. There's always all these negative externalities, to use a word from economics, and yet we do very, very little to address it. It's like, I can't stand to eat the meat, yet I watch the slaughter. And that continues to be happening regularly. So what is the impact of all the policy failure here? And probably in the question and answer, I can maybe think about some solutions here. There's a lot of perversity when it comes to the notion of building a wall. Recently there have been reports that walls that were put up during this zeal to build a wall are already collapsing. They were built on sand. They weren't built with appropriate foundation. And I think it is just so emblematic of what our policy is really all about. The shifting sands along the Rio Grande to the point where, they're going to cause harm to the environment, they're going to fall into the water, animals may die. But then again, immigrants may use them as a bridge across the river. The other thing, like I said, it makes for good TV, it makes for good political messaging, but at the end of the day, it does really nothing to address where we're at. And then finally, there are millions of jobs in this country that remain unfilled. We're having a lot of difficulty making sure that we can provide enough workers across the entire spectrum of our economy to ensure that it can continue moving forward. We have an opportunity. I've seen efforts to kind of put guest worker programs into place, but we can't go back to the Bracero program of the 1940s and 50s because of the abuses that were embedded in that. As part of the practice of many of the people that came to the United States during that period of time were subjected to those types of things. The instrumentality and this dysfunction is the core of why immigration policy doesn't work, obviously. We can say that they're systemic, we can say that they're structural, but I think there's an element of human agency here for us personally that we have to take into consideration. Some of it can be a little over the top. I'll give you a quick anecdote here. I got married 32 years ago to a wonderful woman from Minnesota who actually speaks better Spanish than I do. She lived in Spain, so she cheated, but it's okay. When we first got married, we went grocery shopping, and she said, I want to get some grapes. I said, I don't eat grapes. She said, why? I said, well, because it's the boycott against grapes. She goes, the boycott was lifted years ago. And I had been blithely going on through my life just not eating grapes because I believe in stuff. So I'm gonna go to the library and check this out, and sure as heck, I had been wrong. It had been lifted years previous. I still don't eat grapes all that much. I'd be conditioned to do it. But what it is to say is that we also have a role that we can play as individuals in all of this. Are we ensuring that we're voting for people in our elected positions across the entire spectrum, starting out with school boards, starting out with supervisors and city council people, to adhere to the kind of same vision that we have for being a welcoming community, as so many of those sociologists and social worker people attest to here. The fact of the matter is that we have to also begin thinking about, are we part and parcel of this system in this country that allows for that to continue to occur? And what element of responsibility do we have as humans to ensure that we know that people can have a working wage? And somebody says, well, if that was the case, I'd have to pay $10 for a hamburger at McDonald's. You may very well have to. And it seems as though market forces are already compelling us to move in that particular direction because people are not willing to work at McDonald's any longer, as an example here. And like I said, can we escape the trap of low-wage, low-skill labor in this country that is so deeply embedded and ingrained in everything that this country does? If you think about, we had a storm recently, and I saw some people's roofs already being replaced. And I guarantee you, not one of those individuals is here legally in this country. And I'm pretty sure that there is a pretty strong element of wage theft going along with the contractors paid to what they get paid at the end of the day. I think that we have to be conscious of those things and begin calling them out when it happens. I think that that's something that we all can do on an ongoing basis. So I'm going to end there. I promised that I wouldn't go on and on and on, because you folks would get in trouble if we let this guy talk much longer. But I wanted to kind of reflect briefly on the challenges and the opportunities that may lie before policymakers and the general public, and really American society as a whole, as a path toward resolution of this particular problem. I don't have any illusions about that this is going to be easy. And yet we're at a particular point, we're at a point of inflection as to how we might be able to address it and what the steps might be as we move forward. So thank you very much.
We're at the moment, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. If you do have a question, we need to use the mics since we have a number of people online. But I do have a question for Rowena. At what point will they, Okay. So why don't we do this? For those who are present, go table to table so it's not like everyone back there. There's food back there for your to have during this time. But we can also at this time take some questions from the audience, and then I'll check my screen here for questions that are coming from the online audience as well. So anyway, questions? Any questions that you might have? Let them process a little bit. Tim.
Thank you very much. You alluded in your talk, which was very illuminating, thought-provoking. You alluded to the root, especially in the North American context, the root causes of migration in Latin America, especially. And I was just wondering, might you reflect a little bit on the failure in policy to address that, the failure of foreign policy to address that in terms of the demands of domestic politics? It just strikes me that that might be something worth hearing some reflections on.
Well, I mean, I think we so often have a two-faced approach to how we manifest our politics, especially our legislation. On one hand, there is a very strong impetus toward kind of a racially based exclusion in this country. It's always been part of the history of the United States. And at the very same time, though, we demand products and services to be delivered to us at low cost. There's a dysfunctionality to that, because the two actually need to be married in a very creative manner, an innovative manner that allows us to address that impetus to kind of marginalize and to reject people because they quote unquote are not like us. First and foremost. The other part of it is, though, and I think this has manifestations in other areas, so I'll talk briefly about it in a second, is that, we also want to have access to the market in a way that's not going to overtly, inconvenience us, And I'll give a great example that I like to give is drugs in this country. The general population that consumes illicit drugs is maybe 10 to 15%, and yet it is very, very lucrative trade. The Mexican cartels they're hanging their hat on that one. And the irony of this is, and I said, it's the truest manifestation of market economy, because if we wanted tortillas, the Mexicans would send us tortillas. And the cartels have found a way to get into this because we do want drugs. But unfortunately, to the point that's happening now, is that they're poisoning us very purposefully with putting fentanyl into everything. And so I would tell people, if you're going to choose to do that, you better know that you're playing Russian roulette with yourself. But I think, though, one of the other things that I think is important about this is for us to understand that we don't question that demand for low cost. It's what the consumer wants as opposed to what the producer has no responsibility in that, And that's one of those dysfunctionalities, There is some impetus, there is some inclination in our business school here that we want to take those things. We want to be, we want to be socially conscious of how we do the things that we do, but not enough producers of products and goods to do that. They're playing at the end of the day, hey, what can I do to continue to keep my operation fungible? What can I do to stay in business? And those paths they diverge, they don't ever come together. I think it's rather unfortunate that that's really kind of the commentary on that. But I don't see any real way out of that until such time as we can begin talking about, this penchant for wanting to isolate, marginalize people that are quote unquote unlike us. At the very same time, we clamor for those very same people to come and do the work that we're not willing to do. I got to tell you, I did try to be a farm worker for about 2 days, and my uncle sent me home. He said, "Are you good at school?" I said, "Yeah, he's the stage."
We have an online question. This is from Anna. Other than dual language school classes, what other ways has the Omaha community addressed the issues of wages, job skills in order to welcome and or accommodate the immigrant community? How is their example being uplifted as an example for other areas with an increase in immigrants?
So they used to, in Omaha, Nebraska, there was some community service organizations that popped up to fill the breach in many of those areas. The Latino Center for the Midlands created a very robust GED program in Spanish for individuals who are interested in going and getting a high school diploma. Additionally, another social service agency that works specifically, the Heartland Worker Center, that works specifically on providing people with knowledge and understanding of workplace safety, workers' rights, to provide organizational skills, not to create unions, but to really have some true representation in local politics, as it were. And other organizations that created opportunities for people in the community to form their own businesses. So there was a small business development center in Omaha. It's been working. One of the things that I did along with others, what we did is we brought together representatives from different social service agency boards and nonprofit boards to work with local government to begin to identify areas of need and to apply resources appropriately. They were able to benefit greatly from some of the money that came through COVID to provide resources for the community. And most of it in terms of providing support, a backstop, I would say, for economic endeavors in the community. And the other part of it is that as the community in Omaha has gotten more familiar with the Latino population, they're seeing it as being something beneficial. And so some of the businesses have very purposefully taken up efforts to provide more diversity within their particular workforces. Omaha is the center of a lot of corporate offices, and many of those places were completely bereft of anybody of color. And yet they've been very intentional about trying to diversify their workforce. And it's having an impact. I think they still have a very long way to go. I would like to say that Texas is much, much further along in that way, especially the Fort Worth thing. That's one of the things that I really have come to appreciate since I've been here. Still have a lot of work to do in Fort Worth as well, but I think they're much better situated because they've been dealing with this much, much longer.
I thought I saw a hand over here on the left. No? Shelley? Yeah.
Thank you. My question was mostly answered by your answer to Anna's online question, because I don't know, I guess I'll just try to ask it in a slightly different way, but given just the anti-immigrant sentiment since 2016 or whenever we want to pin this heightened and really nasty immigrant polemic, your story of what has happened in Omaha and Senator Chuck Hagel's cooperation or instigation, it sounds almost fairy tale-like given how hard things are now, or how the discourse has gotten even coarser. I mean, even your story, for instance, that in this Omaha school district, there's bilingual education from primary school to high school. I mean, has that, I mean, her question was, how can that serve as a model? I guess I would also ask, is it still working, or could you imagine, do things like that still happen?
Well, so, I have to tell you that I continue to be optimistic, because we did about 3 or 4 things after all of this started, and we're not taking credit for it. I think part of what we did is that we animated the minds of some very, very ambitious young folks in the community early on. Some of them we provided them with education so they can move forward. Some of them chose to go off to graduate school and Divinity school and things of that nature. But they have taken the lead for themselves. And I have to tell you, it's this wonderful example of empowerment. In 2006, there was a significant question rising because of the numbers of children of immigrants who had not been born in the United States coming and attending high school and wanting to graduate. And they were trying to go to the University of Nebraska. The University of Nebraska said they were going to be treated as international students because they weren't born in the United States. And the students came and asked one of our guests at a symposium that we had what they could do. And he said, change the law. And it was a 2-year project undertaken by a group of students, obviously then adults with law degrees and other folks like that began to help them out. But they made it possible to pass what was called the Nebraska Dream Act, that would allow any graduate of Nebraska high school to attend a state university at in-state tuition rates. It still didn't address the issue that they couldn't get grants or scholarships and weren't allowed to get any money from the Pell Grants program as well. So that was still problematic. They did not, stop there. They began actively lobbying us, and by this time already I'm in my role as an administrator. because I'd been the director of the center at the university. And what happened was, I started talking to the donor in the community, and I said, I've got this pool of remarkable young folks who would love to attend the university, but they can't afford to go. I had a 25-year-old student that had been taking 1 or 2 classes a semester for 6 years. He was in his junior year of status. He would work for 6 months and go to take a semester of classes. And that's what he was doing. He was a straight A student. And I used him as an example. And this donor said, well, let's change that. Let's make it so that they can attend. And so in 2017, he gave me $750,000 to start a Dreamers Pathway Scholarship Program. I used that money initially to bring in 15 students. It's now 50 students that are attending the university on an annual basis to attend the university, to graduate, to go on. Covers everything soup to nuts for them. Remarkable. What an incredible individual, and what a wonderful human to work with. And the only thing he asks that his parents, who the foundation are named for, get an opportunity to interact with the students. And we have a big, celebration at the end of the year. And everybody's crying because of what has happened. It's very profound. But then the students came back to us again and said, you know what, we can't get jobs. We're not US citizens, and so they're not going to allow me to get my engineering license. I can't practice law. I can't get a medical license in the state of Nebraska. But this same group of students now that we've been working with for 8 to 10 years took it upon themselves to go to the state legislature and began to lobby for a change in the law. That basically they were successful and made it so that any person who graduates with a degree from any university in the state of Nebraska, private or public, would be able to have licensing in 27 different categories, from hairdresser and plumber all the way to physician. And they lobbied in a manner that I think is a story that needs to be told time and time again, because at the end of that, it passed. There was opposition, obviously, to it. It passed by the hair of its chinny chin chin. But I gotta tell you, at the end of it, the gallery was full of all the students and their supporters. And the state legislatures turned and applauded the students. I'd never seen anything quite like that in my life. And so I think it's really a testimony to what happens when you have consistent support and dedication to helping people thrive where they're at. Because at the end of the day, everyone would benefit from those individuals receiving those licenses to do that work in the community. From one young man who became an OBGYN, who could speak to the Latino community. He's become the go-to doctor for people. And so those are just examples of how that work is carried forward. I'd like to take some credit for it, but at the end of the day, all we did was plant the seed. And we allowed it to flourish. And we continue to provide resources and fertilizer and nutrients for those people to become, the best versions of themselves. And I take great pride in that. Many of them have become close friends and go to baptisms and weddings and all things of that nature. But I think, for me, it really was an area of own personal growth, because, I have my story, which was one that we didn't talk about when my family went through. We want to put that one aside. We just want to put our nose to the grindstone. We want to go to school. We want to be great about what we're doing. But let's forget about the past. I've been able to go full circle and embrace that past again in a way that I don't think I would have had I not had this experience.
Let me give you Anna's response.
Okay.
Thank you. Living in West Virginia, the immigrant populations are not what other regions see. However, it is helpful, I think, for these emerging communities to be able to look at communities like Omaha, who are relatively new to these issues, and how they have adopted. Texas has many wonderful examples, but with such a long history of it, newer areas will want to see how this has been addressed in order to better know how they can move forward. Thank you for what you did, for what you do. So, Michael. Wait. You need the.
So you complimented Fort Worth on progress in addressing immigrant issues. Would you elaborate on that? Is that policy level? Is it at the business level? Help me to understand.
I think that I see it first in the social perspective. I see a lot more folks like me in professional positions across the entire spectrum of the community in a way that I didn't see in Nebraska. I was a bit of a unicorn, I'm just going to be very honest with you, and I didn't like that. I didn't like being, and so what I am enjoying about being here is that I am meeting elected officials. I am meeting professionals from different fields who I can have relationships with in a way that I couldn't in the past because, for the longest time, I was the only full tenured Latino professor in the entire faculty at my university. And that's kind of a lonely place if you think about it, I love my colleagues dearly. I had a wonderful time interacting with them, but I never had conversations about those types of things, never shared the insights. And so I spent most of my time there focusing on younger people. I know that we have significant issues here around, the economic vitality, especially on the north side, but as I've gotten to know folks there as well, I'm impressed with their vision of what they see for themselves. It has not been without a lot of trials and tribulations for them. There's a lot of work that went on before I ever got here to create what is here. It's not a complete picture by any stretch of the imagination, but I feel, and I imagine that we will see in the future the emergence of a wealthier cadre of Latinos in the community. It's already beginning to happen. We will see more elected officials, people assuming positions of importance in the community, and that's wonderful. I'm really, yesterday I had the opportunity to meet Dolores Huerta, but I was actually much more impressed with the TCU students who I met yesterday that were being moderators of the panel and providing kind of some of the support for the wonderful things that she was doing. I gotta tell you, the highlight of the day for me was watching her for an hour just take pictures with everyone and anyone who would come up and ask her and be so gracious about it. I think it set for the students an example of even when you get to a stature like hers, that you can still be human. So like I said, I'm optimistic. I'm not having illusions about the work that has to happen for there to be fuller kind of integration and even leadership in the community. But I think from my perspective, relatively new, I've been impressed.
Speaking of students, for those who have been members of the travel seminar, will you stand up? If I would embarrass you for a bit. There you go. Monica? Yeah, there you go. I just wanted you to see. These are some, and there's many, many more that are.
I'm gonna go next year.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Next year.
But anyway, I'm sorry. Just wanted to see. There was a question.
Thank you so much for being with us today. I spend as much time as I can in Omaha because 2 of my 3 granddaughters live there, and their parents too. So I have some first-hand experience. I know that the Roman Catholic Diocese in Omaha is one of the most conservative in the country on certain issues, but I'm curious, you haven't said anything about the role of the church in terms of creating that climate of reception. I just wonder if you have some comments on that.
Well, so Our Lady of Guadalupe Church in South Omaha has really kind of been the cornerstone of Latino life going back to the 1920s. There were Mexican families that settled in Nebraska because of the railroad, and then obviously because of the presence of the meatpacking industry there. And so Our Lady of Guadalupe has been a presence in the community. And early on, they had a bit of a renegade pastor there, Father Damien Zerline, who really provided a platform for a lot of community engagement. Some of the members of the congregation actually became the first people to begin registering people to vote. community, and it's become a really robust operation as a consequence. There's still some distortion in there. The population is well over 50%, but the voter eligible population still remains very, very low, owing to the fact that many of these individuals are immigrants. And so, but the numbers of folks turning 18 who were born in the United States is significant. So Our Lady of Guadalupe has done a really good job there. The Methodist Church in Omaha, Nebraska, provided the resources for immigrant legal services. And it was kind of, only kind of nipping at the edges. They could only attend to a few people on an annual basis. I think it was more for show than anything else, but they hired a really intrepid young attorney who's from Argentina, originally a US citizen now, who really transformed that agency and made it into actually one of the largest immigrant serving operations in the legal services in the United States. And so they ended up having to move out of South Omaha into an abandoned medical services building in the middle of the city. But they have operations across the entire state now. So, that initially was funded and resourced by the Methodist Church. But what the director did was reach into the philanthropic community there in Omaha, Nebraska, and really got a lot of funding from those folks there. I don't know if you guys are aware that Omaha, Nebraska is the home of Warren Buffett. And all the people that invested $5,000 within in 1962 are all billionaires. And so we have something called competitive philanthropy in Omaha, Nebraska. It makes it a very unique setting for this type of an endeavor. And if they see something that is working, that community will step up and provide resources. And this has been one of the best examples of it. And so you're right, the Catholic Church has only kind of been working kind of at the margins. They have the Juan Diego Center in South Omaha, the church itself, but in that parish in particular, of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the broader kind of the Missouri River Conference of the United Methodist Church was really instrumental there. And then a lot of other churches have done some work there as well. So there's always more work to do. I know the Salvation Army has been huge in Omaha. They established a proc center there, which is one of their national kind of centers for outreach. And so that's been actually pretty profound there as well, because they put themselves right in the middle of South Omaha with a $70 million structure to provide community service in the middle of the community. And it's actually been a catalyst for other economic development around it as a consequence.
We are coming to the end of today's presentation, and so, but I wanted to just sort of end with a quick question. You touched upon some of the relationships with the church. Not knowing very well, like, what are you seeing in, like, what would serve our students in terms of curriculum, in terms of bringing in your DEI sort of angle?
I think that anytime an individual has an opportunity to see things firsthand, it has a transformative effect on them. We don't need to go across the world to see human suffering. It's in our midst. And I think part of the things that I always kind of chided my congregation that I belong to, they were doing missionary work, had to raise $50,000 to send 12 kids to some remote part of the planet. I said, we could just go down the street and have an even more profound impact. But part of it is divesting individuals of that sense that I got to go somewhere else to do the work. And I remember I lived in Georgia for a while, and I was going to a Sunday school class there, and there was a quote on the wall, is that ministry isn't something you go out and do, it's something you do as you go. And I've always felt that if I can, in the things that I do in the classroom, I always tell the students that this is what I'm doing, and kind of do some backhanded proselytizing. But what I'm trying to do is embed a sentiment, an ethos, a sensibility to empathy that allows that individual to really embrace the full humanity of the people that they encounter. especially in the political world, because the decisions that are made in that arena are consequential. People live and die by the decisions that are made. And so I would hope that, we would continue to be thoughtful about how we integrate some of those values into the work that we do. It's so interesting. I actually had to present yesterday before the board trustees, and I made some comments about equity and social justice. And one of the board members said, well, where does this come from? I said, it comes from the good charge. You're the ones that wrote that vision statement. You're the ones that embedded those values in the strategic plan. All I'm doing is following up on what you charged us to do. And he kind of chuckled because he goes, well, I was hoping you were going to say that. So, no, that's how it goes. And I really feel that, if we're intentional about making sure that we provide individuals with firsthand opportunities to see and to engage where these things happen, that's when transformation occurs.
Thank you. We've reached the end, unfortunately. Actually, I have a lot more questions, and I want to let you know that we are teaching a course here in May that's focused on knowing our DFW area a bit better on immigration. So I haven't looked at enrollment, but I know several students are enrolled already. Let's take this time to thank Dr. Hopefully this is not his last time here. We'd like to bring you over again sometime in the future to discuss other